The internet has made it easier than ever to buy whatever we desire. Vintage antiques, rare collectibles, even forgotten relics of the past. But some things were never meant to change hands. What happens when you bring home something that carries a past far darker than its price tag? When the objects we touch back. Tonight, we explore real stories from the dark side of online shopping. Cursed objects, haunted relics, and secondhand finds that should have stayed forgotten. If you dare to enter the archives of the eerie, subscribe now to the Fear Archives. Leave a like if you want more true horror stories and tell us, have you ever bought something online that didn't feel quite right? It was a simple eBay purchase. A vintage porcelain doll, its face cracked with age, its blue glass eyes staring straight ahead. Emily had always loved collecting antiques, and when she saw the listing, Antique Victorian Doll, Needs a New Home, she couldn't resist. The seller had no reviews, but the price was good. Too good. She clicked Buy Now. 2 days later, the package arrived. The box was lighter than she expected, almost too light for something made of porcelain. The cardboard was old, sealed with yellowed packing tape. No return address. Emily peeled back the layers of paper inside. There it was, the doll. Dressed in faded lace, its once rosy cheeks now dull and chipped. It looked tired, like it had been waiting for someone to find it again. A faint musty scent rose from the fabric. Dust, mold. No, something else. She couldn't place it. Still, she propped the doll on her bedroom shelf among the others in her collection. That night, she dreamed of footsteps moving across the floor. The next morning, the doll wasn't on the shelf. It had fallen, landing face up on her dresser. Its cracked lips parted slightly, as if whispering. Emily frowned. Maybe she had knocked it over without realizing. She placed it back. That night, the dream returned. Footsteps. A faint rustling like fabric shifting. The next morning, the doll was on the floor again. But this time, it was closer to the bed. By the fourth night, Emily knew something was wrong. She had tested it, placing the doll in a completely different spot before going to bed. But every morning, it moved. At first, just a few inches. Then, across the room. Then, one morning, she woke up to find it sitting on her nightstand, facing her. That was the last straw. She grabbed the doll, shoved it back in its box, and stuffed it in the closet. That night, she slept deeper than she had in days. No footsteps. No rustling. Until 3:12 a.m., a sharp thud. She bolted upright, heart pounding. The room was dark, shadows stretching across the floor from the dim streetlight outside. Her closet door was open. The box lay tipped over, and the doll was out, sitting at the foot of her bed, facing her, waiting. Emily didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stared at it, her body frozen with a fear she had never felt before. This wasn't her imagination. It wasn't her sleepwalking. Something was wrong with that doll. Slowly, she reached for her phone, keeping her eyes locked on it. She turned on the flashlight. That's when she saw it. The dust around the doll was disturbed, like something had crawled. And then, the doll's head tilted slightly. Crack. The sound of porcelain grinding against itself, like stiff joints moving for the first time in years. She grabbed the doll, ran outside, and threw it into the dumpster. She didn't care how much she had paid. It could stay there. The next morning, she checked the dumpster before heading to work. It was empty. The trash collectors hadn't come yet. The doll was gone. Weeks later, she got a message on eBay from a different seller. Antique Victorian doll, needs a new home. The listing photo was blurry, but she didn't need to see it clearly. She knew it was the same doll. and now it was looking for someone else. It started as a lucky find. Mark was a writer, the kind who collected old things, who romanticized the past. He spent hours scrolling through online auctions, hunting for vintage books, old letters, pieces of history. Then he saw it. Early 1900s typewriter, still functional. The listing was simple. The photo showed a black antique typewriter, its metal keys gleaming under dim light. The price? Almost too good. The seller's profile was empty. No reviews, no past sales. Mark hesitated. Then he clicked, "Buy now." 2 days later, the typewriter arrived. The package was too heavy for its size. The cardboard was wrapped so tightly in twine that Mark had to cut it away with a knife. The moment he pulled the typewriter free, the air in the room shifted. Like the weight of the object wasn't just physical. It was beautiful. A classic Remington model. The keys were smooth and cool beneath his fingertips. The ink ribbon was still in place, though brittle. Mark set the machine on his desk, admiring it under the glow of his lamp. That night, he started typing. The keys were stiff, resistant at first, but they loosened the more he used them. He was halfway through a paragraph when he paused, rereading his last sentence. Something was wrong. His fingers hovered over the keys, but the sentence on the page wasn't what he had written. It was close, almost identical, but a few words had changed, rearranged. I walked down the empty street, the lamps flickering overhead as if something unseen watched from the shadows. But Mark hadn't written unseen, he had written distant. Maybe he had mistyped. Maybe he was just tired. He shrugged it off and kept writing. But as the night went on, it kept happening. Little changes. A word here, a phrase there. It didn't seem like much until it started finishing his sentences. Mark hesitated before pressing the next key, but before he could, the typewriter did it for him. The key depressed on its own, then another, and another, a slow, deliberate rhythm. Mark's breath caught in his throat as the machine typed, without him. "I see you." He shoved his chair back. The typewriter sat motionless on his desk, the paper still perfectly aligned. The ink on the page was fresh. He grabbed the sheet and crumpled it, tossed it aside. He told himself it was just a mechanical glitch. Maybe the keys were sticking. But when he turned back to the desk, a new sheet of paper was already in the typewriter. Waiting. Mark turned on every light in the room. He tested the typewriter again, pressing each key one by one. It didn't move on its own. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe... The typewriter clacked. All on its own, one key, then another. The new page filled with words. "Keep going, Mark. You're almost there." Mark's skin prickled. He reached for the paper, hands shaking, but he stopped when he saw the next line. "Don't turn around." His entire body locked in place. A deep, primal fear settled in his bones. The room behind him felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy. His desk lamp flickered. The typewriter clacked again. Slow, deliberate. "You brought me home. I can write too." The keys pressed faster now, hammering the page, the sound filling the small room. Mark stumbled back, heart pounding. The final words appeared in a single line across the paper. "Let's finish the story." The typewriter stopped. The lamp flickered once more. Then, the chair behind him creaked. Something was sitting there, watching, waiting. Mark ran. The next morning, Mark packed the typewriter into its box. He didn't list it for sale. He didn't donate it. He drove miles away to an empty field and left it there, deep in the grass, under the open sky. Then he walked away without looking back. For weeks, everything seemed fine. Then one night, he checked his email. A new message. No sender, no subject. Just a single attachment, a photo, his desk, his room, the typewriter, back where it had been. The final words typed on the page, "I see you." Some stories don't just want to be written. They want to write you. It started as an impulse buy. Daniel spent his nights combing through online auctions, searching for lost art, the kind of pieces with history. He wasn't looking for anything specific, just something unusual. A painting with a story, something forgotten, waiting to be rediscovered. Then he found it. Vintage oil portrait, no artist, one of a kind. The listing was sparse, with only one grainy image, a Victorian-style painting in an elaborate gold frame, leaning against a dust-covered wall. The subject was difficult to make out under the thick layer of grime that obscured the face, but the description said nothing about damage. Daniel stared at the price. $30. That was a steal. Even for something worthless, the frame alone was worth far more. There were no bids, no reviews on the seller's account. Just an anonymous user profile with zero history. It felt off. But the low price nagged at him. He clicked buy now. 2 days later, it arrived. The package was heavier than expected. Daniel lugged it inside, setting it carefully on the floor of his apartment. The brown paper wrapping was brittle and stained with something dark. It smelled faintly of mildew, like it had been stored somewhere damp. His fingers itched to rip it open. He slid the paper away, unveiling an ornate gold frame, its intricate carvings dulled by years of neglect. The painting itself was coated in dust, the image underneath barely visible. Grabbing a cloth, he dipped it in warm water and began gently wiping the surface. Slowly, the figure beneath emerged. A woman. Pale, dressed in Victorian mourning attire, her black dress blending into the background. Her skin was almost translucent, her expression eerily still. But the eyes, they were too focused, too aware. The artist had painted them with such unsettling precision that Daniel felt like they were watching him. Something about her looked unfinished. He ran a finger lightly over the canvas. The paint was still wet. That night, Daniel propped the painting against the wall of his study, leaving it to dry. The air in the apartment felt denser, as if the walls had drawn closer. He dismissed the feeling and went to bed. Sometime in the night, he woke abruptly. The air was thick, like it was pressing against his chest. He blinked at the darkened ceiling, disoriented. Then, he heard it. A soft rustling. Fabric shifting. The noise was coming from the study. Daniel sat up, his breath shallow. The door to the study was slightly open, allowing just a sliver of darkness to spill into the hallway. He reached for his bedside lamp. The second the light flicked on, the noise stopped. Complete silence. His heart pounded. Slowly, he crept out of bed and walked toward the study. The painting was no longer leaning against the wall. It was standing upright, centered perfectly, facing his bedroom door. The next morning, Daniel convinced himself it had been his imagination. Maybe he had placed it that way and forgotten. Maybe he had been half asleep. But then he noticed something. The woman's mouth had changed. The once tightly closed lips were now slightly parted, as if she had begun to speak. He ran his hands over the painting, searching for any sign that it had been tampered with. But the brushstrokes were seamless, untouched. This was impossible. That night, he set up his phone to record. He wanted proof that he wasn't losing his mind. The next morning, he played the footage. For hours, nothing. Then, at 3:12 a.m., the painting moved. Not a trick of the light, not a shift in the air. It tilted forward. Then it snapped back into place. and the woman's mouth had opened wider. Not slowly, not over time. It happened all at once, like she had reacted to something, like she had seen something. Daniel tried to ignore it. He covered the painting with a blanket. That night, his recording caught something else. A soft whisper, a voice that was too close to the microphone. "Finish me." Daniel's skin crawled. He pulled the sheet away. The woman's mouth was fully open now. But that wasn't the worst part. In the background behind her, something new had appeared. A shadowy figure, standing just behind her, watching, waiting. Daniel tried to sell the painting. His listing wouldn't post. His phone glitched whenever he tried to take a picture. He tried to burn it. The flames refused to catch. Each night, the shadow in the painting grew clearer, closer. The final night, Daniel woke up to find the painting no longer in the study. It was in his bedroom, leaning against the wall opposite his bed. And the woman's hand, once pressed against her lap, was now reaching out of the frame, as if trying to crawl out, as if trying to pull something in. Daniel fled. He left the painting in the apartment, packed his things, and never went back. A month later, he received an email. No subject, no sender. Just an attached image. It was a photo of the painting. But the woman wasn't in it anymore. The shadow behind her was gone too. Instead, there was a new figure in the frame. Sitting, facing forward. Its details were still unfinished, but it looked a lot like him. Some things should never be seen. Some things should never be owned, and some things should never be recorded. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, and once you've seen something, sometimes it sees you back. Jack didn't care for streaming. He liked the tactile feel of things, the weight of a book, the whir of a cassette, the soft clatter of a VHS tape being slotted into place. Something real, something you could hold. That's why he collected old tapes. Not the rare ones, not the expensive ones. Just the weird, forgotten relics of people's attics. Half-recorded soap operas, home movies, mislabeled horror films. The stranger, the better. One night, scrolling through an eBay lot sale, he found a listing that caught his eye. Vintage VHS lot, random tapes, no returns. The thumbnail showed a dusty cardboard box filled with unmarked black tapes. Some missing labels, some with peeling stickers. No details, no descriptions. Just the kind of mystery he loved. $15. Jack clicked, "Buy now." The box arrived 4 days later. It smelled like mildew and basement air, the kind of scent that clung to forgotten things. Jack tore it open and started sorting. Most were exactly what he expected. Recorded sitcoms, old sports games, someone's forgotten wedding footage. Except one. A black VHS tape, its case scratched and scuffed with a faded white label. Someone had written on it long ago in black marker, "Watch me." No date, no context. Jack grinned. Probably some kid's prank from decades ago. He had to see what was on it. He popped the tape into his VCR. The machine whirred and the TV screen flickered to life, at first static. Then an image, grainy, washed out. A home movie. The camera wobbled, panning across a small living room. A couch, a coffee table, a television set with an old rabbit ear antenna. The lighting was strange, too dim, like it had been filmed in the evening with only a single lamp on. Then the camera turned. A figure sat on the couch, not moving, not speaking, just sitting there. They were turned away from the camera, facing the TV. Jack frowned. Was this some kind of art film? A weird experimental thing? The camera zoomed in slowly. The figure on the couch didn't react. Then, the screen cut to static. Jack hit rewind, confused. The tape had only played for 3 minutes. Nothing happened. But something about it bothered him. He didn't remember seeing a reflection in the TV screen. Later that night, Jack tried again. Maybe the tape had been damaged. Maybe he had missed something. He pressed play. The static cleared and the video started again. The same living room, the same couch. But now something had changed. The figure was facing the camera. Jack's breath hitched. Not fast, not sudden. They were just sitting closer, like they had shifted forward, inch by inch. Still no movement, still no sound. Then the screen cut to static again. Jack's hands were clammy. Had he imagined the first viewing? He rewound the tape. Press play, the same scene. The figure even closer. The camera zooming in, deliberate, suffocating. Jack felt his stomach tighten. The tape wasn't repeating. It was continuing. Jack didn't sleep. The next night he sat down and tried one more time, but this time, something was different. The VHS didn't start with static. It started where it left off. The camera panned. The figure was now right in front of the lens. Too close, too still. Jack's breath came in short gasps. There were no features, no face, just a dark blur, as if something had smudged the image. Then, the camera tilted downward. Jack's hands clenched into fists. There was now another VHS tape on the coffee table. Identical to the one he was watching. Identical to the one he had in his own VCR. The video glitched. Then, in a sudden burst of movement, the figure turned toward the screen, and Jack's TV shut off. Jack sat in silence. His apartment was too quiet. The TV shouldn't have turned off. The VCR was still running. The tape was still playing. But the screen was black. He ejected the tape. It was warm. Too warm. And when he turned the cassette over, the label had changed. The faded words, "Watch me," had been scratched out, replaced with new writing, words that hadn't been there before. "Look behind you." Jack froze. His breath hitched. The apartment felt wrong, like something was standing just out of sight, waiting for him to turn around. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. Instead, he grabbed the tape, shoved it back into the box, and ran. He drove miles away to a lake, the trees tall and swaying under the dim glow of the moon. And without hesitating, he threw the tape into the water. It sank. Jack stood there, breathless, staring at the ripples spreading across the surface. Then, a faint flickering light reflected off the lake. He turned toward his car. The headlights were off. The light was coming from the trees, like an old TV screen glowing in the distance, flickering, static. Jack backed away slowly. Then he heard it. The sound of a VHS tape being inserted into a player. A heavy click. A voice crackled through the trees, low and distorted, but unmistakable. "Playing from where you left off." Elliot never believed in ghosts. He believed in coincidences, glitches, corrupted data. Things had logical explanations if you looked hard enough. That's why he wasn't worried when he found the old flip phone on eBay. Vintage flip phone. Still works, no charger. The listing was bare bones, no details, just one blurry photo. A black phone, mid-2000s style, with a small external screen and a keypad inside. No scratches, no dents. It looked untouched. $10. A collector's piece, nothing more. Elliot clicked buy now. It arrived 3 days later. No box, just wrapped in crumpled newspaper. The plastic surface was cold, the screen dark. He didn't have a charger for it, but when he flipped it open, the battery was still at 19%. Weird. He pressed the buttons. They clicked mechanically under his fingers. The phone had no contacts, no messages, no call log. Only one thing was saved, a number, not labeled, not stored as a contact, just a lone 10-digit number in the call history. He stared at it for a while, then snapped the phone shut. A useless artifact. Or so he thought. That night, Elliot tossed the phone onto his nightstand and forgot about it. At 3:12 a.m., it vibrated. A short, sharp buzz. Elliot stirred awake, blinking into the dark. His real phone was on silent. Buzz, his eyes darted to the flip phone. The screen was on. One new message. He sat up, throat dry. He hadn't given the number to anyone. It wasn't connected to a carrier. The text was short. "Hello?" Elliot hesitated, then typed back, "Who is this?" Buzz. "Where are you?" A chill crawled up his spine. Delete. Block. He snapped the phone shut. But as soon as he put it down, Buzz. The screen lit up. The message had changed. "I can see you." Elliot turned on the bedside lamp. His room was empty. The flip phone screen stayed on, casting a faint glow against his hand. The text message remained. A prank? No. The phone had no SIM card. It couldn't send or receive texts. Could it? He pried the back off. No battery, no SIM card. It shouldn't even be on. Buzz. A new message. "Don't take it apart." Elliot's hands went ice cold. His breath hitched. The screen flickered. A new text. "Answer." Then the phone rang. Elliot stared at the screen. The call came from the same number in the call history. His finger hovered over decline. Then his own real phone, his modern smartphone, buzzed. A notification. "Incoming call, unknown." Same number. His stomach twisted. He hesitated, then answered the flip phone. A soft crackle. Then silence. "Hello?" The static deepened. Then a voice, not a whisper, not a growl. It was his own voice. "Hello?" His pulse pounded. The line went dead. The phone's screen flickered. A new message appeared. "See you soon." Elliot shut the phone off. Or tried to. The screen refused to go dark. It stayed on, cycling through old text messages, messages he had sent years ago, to old friends, to exes, to people who had died. Each message rearranged, twisted. Things he never said, things he never should have said. Then the screen glitched. It flickered between camera mode and something else, something that wasn't a normal menu, a black screen. Then, pixel by pixel, a low-resolution image began to appear, a grainy, distorted photo, his bedroom taken from outside his window. Elliot's breath shook. The phone screen dimmed. A new message typed itself. "Come outside." His hands clenched the device so hard it creaked. No. Instead, he grabbed his coat, shoved the phone in his pocket, and drove. Out of town. Away. He reached an empty stretch of road near the woods, his only company the distant hum of cicadas. With shaking hands, he threw the phone out the window. It tumbled down into the dark trees. Silence. Then, as he turned to leave, buzz. His real phone. A text. No number. "You dropped me." Elliot's stomach dropped. His phone buzzed again. A photo, the road, his car, taken from just behind him. He turned, eyes wide, but the road was empty. Elliot didn't go home. He checked into a motel, left every light on. His real phone stayed on silent. But in the darkness of his suitcase, something vibrated. Softly, rhythmically, like breathing. He swallowed hard, reached in, and pulled out the flip phone. Back in his pocket. Back with full battery. The screen flickered. A new text. No missed calls. But the call history had changed. One outgoing call. From his number. Made at 3:12 a.m. But he had been asleep. Hadn't he? Clara had always loved secondhand shopping. There was something addictive about it. The thrill of discovery. The idea that something forgotten could find a second life. She was between apartments, living with a friend while searching for a new place. Most of her belongings were packed away, waiting for a fresh start. But she couldn't help herself. Scrolling through eBay, she wasn't looking for furniture. She wasn't looking for anything, really. Then she saw it. Antique Victorian wall mirror, ornate gold frame. The listing was bare bones. One photo, dimly lit, a large oval mirror, its gold frame carved with intricate floral details. The glass looked flawless, untouched. The price? $25. A steal. There was no seller history, no reviews, just one line in the description. Do not use for personal reflection. Clara laughed at the wording. It almost sounded poetic. She clicked buy now. The package arrived sooner than expected. No fragile stickers, no branding. Just a plain cardboard box, sloppily taped. When Clara pulled the mirror out, she was surprised by its weight. It was heavier than she expected. Much heavier. She ran her fingers along the carved gold frame. The craftsmanship was stunning, too perfect almost. The floral details were razor sharp, not dulled by time. But the glass? The glass was strange. No warping, no dust, not even a single scratch. It looked too clear, like looking into a still pond before a storm. She tilted it, watching the way it swallowed the light. Something about it made her uneasy, but she shook it off. She found a place for it in the hallway, across from her bedroom door. A perfect fit. That night, the air in the apartment felt different. Clara wasn't the paranoid type, but that night, as she brushed her teeth, she glanced down the hall and hesitated. The mirror should have reflected her from this angle, but the glass was empty, just a dark void where her reflection should be. A trick of the lighting, she told herself. She stepped closer. There she was, except her reflection moved a fraction too late. Not a glitch, not a shadow delay. Something offbeat, like a bad video feed. She waved her hand. The reflection followed, too perfectly. No flicker, no distortion, just slightly late. Clara exhaled sharply, tearing her gaze away. She flicked off the light and went to bed. The next morning, the mirror was turned to face the wall. Clara stared at it. She hadn't touched it. Her roommate Jess was out of town for the weekend, and yet the mirror was no longer facing the hallway. Someone, or something, had rotated it. She swallowed the unease creeping up her spine. Slowly, she lifted it back into place. The glass was warm, not from sunlight, from something else. That night, she decided to test it. She turned off the lights, stood directly in front of the mirror, and waited. At first, nothing. Then, her reflection blinked. Clara hadn't. She backed away. Her reflection stayed perfectly still. Not frozen, not stuck, just watching. Then, something even worse. The mirror stretched deeper. Not physically. The frame didn't change, but the space inside it, it grew. Like she wasn't looking at a reflection anymore. Like she was looking into another room. An identical room, a room with a mirror hanging on the opposite wall. A room with a figure standing inside it. Not a reflection. Someone else. Someone waiting. Clara didn't sleep. She covered the mirror with a bed sheet. But when she woke, the sheet was on the floor. The mirror was empty. No reflection. No hallway. Just a black void. Then something moved inside it. Not a shadow. A shape. A figure standing where her reflection should have been. Facing forward. Watching. Waiting. Then a hand pressed against the inside of the glass. The mirror wasn't reflecting anymore. It was a door, and someone on the other side wanted in. Clara grabbed the mirror and ripped it off the wall. She ran outside, dragging it down the steps of the apartment building. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she hauled it into the backyard onto the concrete. She lifted a brick and smashed the glass. It shattered, but there was no reflection in the shards, no distorted images, just black, empty pieces, like the mirror had never reflected anything at all. She let out a shaky breath. It was over, or so she thought. That night she walked past the bathroom mirror, and for the briefest second, her reflection didn't move. Not a delay, not an illusion. Just one tiny hesitation, like something was still watching, like something had followed her out. Some mirrors show the past, some show the future, and some don't show you at all. Stories end. The credits roll, the lights come back on, and for a moment we tell ourselves it was just fiction. But some stories, they don't stay contained. Some stories cling to us, waiting to be noticed again. And once you've seen them, once you've let them in, how can you be sure they ever really left? After all, you pressed play. Maybe it was just a story. Maybe when you turn off the screen, the fear will fade with the light. Maybe you'll go to sleep, wake up tomorrow, and this will all be forgotten. Or maybe the stories don't end just because you stop listening. After all, you've already let them in. You're still here, aren't you? If you want more stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and keep watching.